A 19-year-old college dropout is drowning. His mother works two jobs, still falls behind on rent, and coughs through the night because they can't afford a doctor. That financial desperation makes a predatory online ad promising easy money and flexible hours impossible to ignore. He answers it. At a diner the next morning, a recruiter buys him breakfast, handing over a prepaid phone and a debit card with a stranger's name. This is the life of a money mule. The job is purely mechanical. He drives across the city, hitting ATM after ATM. He withdraws $400 here, $600 there. He carefully keeps the amounts just under the daily security limits that would trigger an alarm, learning exactly which machines have cameras and which ones don't. A step above the street-level mule is the caller. In a cramped room smelling of cheap detergent and cigarettes, a dozen people wear headsets and read from taped scripts. They buy lists of elderly victims online and impersonate government agents, telling these targets they owe hidden taxes and that officers are on the way to arrest them. The success of these calls relies on hitting one of four specific psychological pressure points: fear, greed, loneliness, or confusion. The caller's job is to probe the target, figure out which of those four buttons is the most exposed, and press it until the victim breaks. Operating at this level carries a heavy psychological friction. Callers have to listen to an 81-year-old woman cry and talk about her late husband while she reads off gift card numbers. Mules have to physically hold the warm cash they just helped steal. The proximity to the victim makes the damage impossible to ignore. At the entry level of the fraud economy, direct contact with the victim is the single biggest threat to a scammer's longevity. To survive the guilt of hearing someone beg for their last $100, the scammer has to move up the ladder. They have to seek distance. That distance arrives at the fisher level. Here, the scammer stops talking to victims entirely. Instead, they sit behind a keyboard. They write code to clone bank login pages, copying the logos, the fonts, and the fine print to build identical counterfeit portals. The mechanics are designed for stealth. The fisher registers web addresses that are exactly one letter off from the real bank. Then they build automated systems that blast out tens of thousands of emails at 3 in the morning, hitting inboxes when targets are tired, groggy, and least likely to notice the missing letter. This conversion funnel visualizes the mathematical advantage of automated theft. A scammer sends out 10,000 emails. Only a tiny fraction of those people click the link, and an even smaller fraction actually type in their passwords. But at this scale, that tiny fraction still yields hundreds of harvested login credentials by the time the scammer wakes up. With a steady stream of stolen data, the scammer becomes a crew lead. They no longer steal directly. Instead, they manage the risk. They supervise 2 callers, 2 fishers, and 2 mules, handling schedules, varying the mules' routes to avoid police, and cutting loose anyone who skims from the envelope. Automation provides a massive psychological buffer. The old people weeping on the phone are gone. The victims are no longer voices, names, or faces. They are just harvested data points in a spreadsheet, stripped of their humanity. Automating the crime neutralizes the scammer's empathy. By completely separating the theft from the victim, the scammer can easily compartmentalize their actions. They rent a nice apartment, buy a reliable car, and marry a partner who thinks they work in digital marketing. They build a normal, quiet family life entirely funded by stolen money. The operation eventually expands across borders. The scammer becomes a floor boss, flying overseas for weeks at a time to run a 60-seat call center. These massive facilities operate under bright lights in countries where the laws are lenient, and local police chiefs are paid to look the other way. The cons evolve far beyond quick tax fraud. Teams execute months-long pig butchering schemes, building fake relationships with lonely people across the ocean. They create fabricated romance personas and direct targets to counterfeit cryptocurrency platforms, where the numbers only go up, until the victim deposits their entire life savings and the platform suddenly freezes. To maximize efficiency, the criminal enterprise adopts legitimate corporate infrastructure. This organizational chart shows a central executive directing regional managers who oversee floor bosses and individual desk agents. They run the floor like any sales operation, complete with strict quotas, leaderboards, and performance bonuses for the top closers. Behind those numbers is a catastrophic amount of human suffering, but in the executive boardrooms, that pain is completely abstracted into sterile performance metrics. A report crossing a desk detailing 10,000 victims in a single quarter is reviewed entirely as a sales figure.
The devastation scales, but the visibility of it shrinks. The more human suffering a criminal operation causes, the more its daily operations resemble a standard, respectable Fortune 500 company. At the highest levels, the launderer and the architect, the scammer no longer touches the victims, the call centers, or even the cash. They design the systems from the top down, treating human behavior like an engineering problem. This flowchart maps the machinery of laundering. A single digital currency deposit bounces through a dozen exchanges and island shell companies. It moves past lawyers who ask no questions and bankers who take a quiet percentage, finally consolidating as clean money used to purchase apartment buildings and commercial real estate. The kingpin sits at the top of a syndicate stealing from 6 different continents, protected by a structure designed to be completely unmappable. In their day-to-day life, they wear a sharp suit, sit on charity boards, and shake hands with the mayor, posing as a philanthropic local businessman. But extreme power extracts a heavy psychological toll. The bigger the operation gets, the more people want a piece of it. Rivals want the seat, police want the name, and lieutenants want the share. The kingpin trusts no one, sleeps with the lights on, and checks the locks twice, constantly anticipating betrayal or a midnight raid. Decades of strict compartmentalization lead to a crushing irony. The kingpin's daughter grows up safely, entirely on the proceeds of stolen wealth. Now 28 years old, she works as a government prosecutor, specializing in financial crimes, dedicating her life to dismantling the exact networks her father built. Building the perfect criminal architecture successfully isolates the kingpin from law enforcement, but it also permanently severs them from their own family and true identity. They spend 30 years learning to lie to everyone, succeeding so completely that the real person inside is gone. In the final phase, the ghost, the scammer has handed the operation to younger men and retired to a quiet house on a quiet coast. Their money is clean and their face is unknown. Yet they wake at 3 in the morning, walking the perimeter in the dark, tormented by the invisible, abstracted millions they exploited to get there. The silence in the house is absolute. The scammer's final, permanent con is the lie they must maintain to their own spouse and child. The target of their last fraud is their own family, preserving the illusion that the father was a good man who built an honest life. While the ghost sits alone counting the cost, the cycle starts over. Somewhere right now, a broke, desperate 19-year-old is answering an online ad promising flexible hours and easy money. A recruiter is buying him breakfast at a diner. The machinery of exploitation is entirely self-replenishing. The ultimate lie of the scam economy is that extreme wealth buys freedom. A scammer can climb every rung, abstract the suffering, and amass an unspendable fortune. But in the end, scaling deception only purchases permanent, solitary confinement.